con su mujer y enciérrese.
Further.
A mí me vale verga tu pinche chamarra.
¿Algo hay de eso?
¡Ay! ¡Órale, puto! ¡Sácate de aquí, maldito!
The movie opens with a thrilling action sequence. An elite special forces unit is deployed on a top-secret mission to capture Hector Luna, the notorious crime boss who controls a massive illegal weapons trafficking network. As luck would have it, Luna is in the middle of a major arms deal when the operation begins. Wasting no time, the tactical team storms the location, triggering an intense firefight as they move in to take down their target.
¿Vas?
Te dije que te iba a chingar, ¿no?
Following the success of the operation, the Special Forces team is honored by the military for their outstanding achievement. As the leader of the mission, Captain Carlos is invited to deliver a speech before senior military officials and high-ranking officers. However, instead of simply celebrating the victory, Carlos uses the opportunity to expose the corrupt officials within the armed forces who have been protecting and secretly working with Hector Luna. He speaks without hesitation, fully aware of the risks that come with revealing the truth. After the ceremony, a colonel approaches Carlos to congratulate him on the successful mission. He also praises Carlos for having the courage to stand up against corruption within his own institution, even though doing so could put his life in serious danger.
Disfrute su vacación.
As a reward for the successful mission, Carlos and the rest of his team are granted leave to take a well-deserved break and spend time with their families. Carlos decides to go on a vacation with his wife, while his closest friend and trusted aide, Miguel, joins the trip with his own wife. While staying at a hotel, Carlos excuses himself to meet Miguel, who is relaxing by the swimming pool. The two friends chat casually, enjoying a rare moment of peace after everything they've been through. But without warning, the atmosphere takes a terrifying turn when the entire hotel suddenly plunges into darkness as the power goes out.
Ahorita que nos esperamos. Vaya con su mujer y enciérrese.
Meanwhile, Miguel rushes back to his room to make sure his wife is safe. At the same time, Carlos sprints toward his own room. But the moment he steps inside, he's horrified to find his wife lying on the floor in a pool of blood. Before he can even process what he's seeing, a towering man suddenly appears and launches a brutal attack. An intense fight breaks out, with Carlos taking several heavy blows and struggling to keep up. Despite being badly outmatched at first, he eventually manages to overpower the mysterious attacker and bring him down. But what he doesn't realize is that this is only the beginning of a far greater nightmare. Sometime after the bloody incident, it is revealed that Carlos actually survived, despite being thrown from the upper floor of the hotel. To protect him from those still hunting him, he is taken to a secret safe house where his whereabouts remain hidden. Not long afterward, Miguel visits Carlos to check on his recovery and make sure he's getting better. Hoping to lift his friend's spirits, Miguel invites him out for a cup of coffee at a small roadside cafe. After Miguel leaves, Carlos notices a lottery vendor passing by and on a whim buys almost every ticket the man has left. The following morning, while eating breakfast, Carlos glances at a newspaper displaying the winning lottery numbers. To his amazement, one of the tickets he bought is an exact match. But just as he's about to celebrate, he realizes the winning ticket is still inside the jacket he accidentally left behind in a taxi after returning from the cafe the night before. Without wasting a second, Carlos rushes back to the cafe, determined to track down his missing jacket.
Ayer no vino. Vino el martes.
Un taxi.
Without wasting any time, Carlos heads straight to the local taxi depot, determined to retrieve the jacket he left behind the night before. But when he arrives, he's confronted by a group of taxi drivers gathered around the entrance. Unaware that the man standing before them is an elite special forces captain, they casually step into his path, trying to stop him from going any further.
A mí me vale verga tu pinche chamarra.
After finally recovering his jacket, Carlos immediately checks the lottery tickets tucked inside one of the pockets. At that exact moment, the national news announces the winner of the largest lottery jackpot of the year. To Carlos's astonishment, the winning numbers are an exact match with the ticket in his hand. The prize, 1 billion peso, instantly changes his life forever. But instead of using his newfound fortune to live in luxury, Carlos makes a very different choice. He decides to invest every resource at his disposal into hunting down the people responsible for his wife's murder and finally taking the revenge he's been seeking all along.
Voy a usar todo este dinero para encontrar.
Not long after becoming a billionaire, Carlos meets with Miguel and asks him to join his mission for revenge. With his newfound fortune, Carlos is determined to use every resource at his disposal to hunt down the people who destroyed his life. However, Miguel turns down the offer, unwilling to put his wife and child in danger. Even so, Carlos isn't completely alone. He still has two loyal allies he can count on, Lola and Aurelio. Carlos summons them to a motel room, where he reveals the 1 billion peso lottery jackpot that will serve as the financial backbone of his revenge plan. With unlimited resources now at his command, he's finally ready to begin his hunt for those responsible for his wife's murder.
¿Algo hay de eso?
With that kind of money, Carlos now has the resources to build a small army of his own. He spends his fortune on state-of-the-art weapons, tactical gear, and everything else needed to carry out his mission of revenge. Without wasting any time, Carlos purchases a large warehouse and turns it into his new operations base. Once everything is in place, he sets his sights on his first target, Hector Luna. Carlos is convinced that the notorious crime boss holds the key to uncovering the mastermind behind his wife's murder. According to the intelligence they've gathered, Hector is being held in a prison located inside a heavily guarded military base. That means their first objective is clear: infiltrate the military compound and get to Hector before anyone else does. Not long afterward, Aurelio arrives with a brand new Range Rover that he purchased for around 8.5 billion. He chose the SUV because the armored vehicle Carlos had originally requested would take too long to arrive, and they needed a reliable alternative that could still support the mission. With the help of two former mercenaries, Carlos and his team disguise themselves as guests attending an event inside the military base. At the same time, Aurelio hacks into the facility's security system, allowing the team to infiltrate the compound without raising any suspicion. Thanks to the flawlessly executed operation, they successfully make their way to the prison block where Hector Luna is being held.
¿Qué es esto? Tuya de suerte.
¡Órale, puto! ¡Sácate de aquí, maldito!
Shortly after Hector is secured, the situation suddenly spirals out of control when a general begins to suspect Carlos and his team's unusual behavior. Realizing their cover is about to be blown, Carlos has no choice but to take down two soldiers who try to stop them. After successfully escaping the military base, the team transports Hector to their secret hideout. There, he's strapped into an interrogation chair as Carlos begins demanding answers, forcing him to reveal the names of everyone involved in his wife's murder. At long last, every answer Carlos has been searching for rests in the hands of the man sitting right in front of him.
¿Tú eres pendejo o qué?
Carlos resorts to the brutal interrogation techniques he learned during his years in the Special Forces, determined to force Hector into revealing the mastermind behind his wife's murder. He even drives nails into Hector as a last resort, hoping the pain will finally make him talk. But before Hector can utter a single word, a sniper's bullet suddenly tears through his body, killing him instantly. The team quickly realizes that their hideout has already been surrounded by a group of masked mercenaries. With their position compromised and no chance of holding their ground, Carlos and his team are forced to fight their way out, desperately trying to escape the deadly siege. As they make their escape, a massive truck suddenly appears, driven by the mysterious man responsible for murdering Carlos's wife. Without a moment's hesitation, a high-speed chase erupts. Both vehicles race through the streets, each side trying to outmaneuver the other in a heart-pounding pursuit. At one point, their SUV is struck by a powerful C4 explosion. Fortunately, the armored Range Rover absorbs most of the blast, allowing them to keep moving despite the heavy impact. As they speed through a crowded neighborhood, Carlos orders Aurelio to throw bundles of cash onto the street. Just as he expected, people immediately rush into the road to grab the money, throwing the entire area into chaos and creating the perfect distraction for their escape. After finally escaping the mysterious assassin, Carlos and his team relocate to a new safe house far from the city, hoping to stay off the enemy's radar. Once they settle in, Lola and Aurelio remind Carlos that their leave is officially over. Starting the next day, they'll have to return to active duty, meaning they can no longer stand by his side in his mission for revenge. The following morning, Miguel arrives after receiving a call from Carlos the night before. With almost no one else left he can truly trust, Carlos asks Miguel to infiltrate the military archives and search for classified files that might reveal the identities of those responsible for his wife's murder. At first, Miguel refuses, knowing the mission could cost him everything. But after Carlos reminds him of the 12 years they spent fighting side by side and the unbreakable bond they've built through countless battles, Miguel finally gives in and agrees to help his friend one last time.
Vamos.
12 años fue mi sombra.
Once inside the military archives, Miguel begins searching through stacks of classified files, following the instructions Carlos had given him. His objective is to find records of soldiers who had been involved in covert operations or had a history of misconduct. After carefully going through file after file, his efforts finally pay off. One name immediately catches his attention: Juan. According to the military records, Juan was notorious for his ruthless methods and was considered one of the most brutal soldiers in the force. Even more shocking, Miguel realizes that Juan is the very man Carlos has been hunting all this time, the one who murdered his wife. Without wasting a second, Miguel immediately sends Juan's home address to Carlos. Just moments after the message is delivered, the colonel's wife approaches him and invites him to a meeting where several high-ranking military officials have already gathered. Inside the room, the officers are enjoying an elegant meal and chatting casually, a stark contrast to the strict, disciplined image they present to the public. Meanwhile, Miguel quietly sits through the meeting, hoping the information he managed to send will give Carlos the lead he needs to track down his next target.
Ve ahí a mis generales. Saben que fue usted quien escondió a Estrada. Parece que ahora lo quieren mandar al norte.
Meanwhile, Miguel was finally confronted by the colonel's wife, who revealed that she already knew everything about his secret communication with Carlos. Even more shocking, she had discovered that Carlos was still alive and had been quietly hunting down everyone responsible for his wife's murder. Without wasting a second, she forced Miguel into an impossible choice: remain loyal to the commander who had fought beside him for years, or protect the military career he had spent his entire life building. The decision was now entirely his. At the same time, Carlos headed to Juan's address using the information Miguel had managed to send before they lost contact. As soon as he arrived, he was greeted by the aggressive barking of a guard dog. Fortunately, the animal was chained up, allowing Carlos to slip past without much trouble. He then noticed that the front door had been left unlocked. Sensing an opportunity, he quietly entered the house and began searching every room, hoping to uncover any clue that would lead him one step closer to the man who had destroyed his life. After searching the entire house, Carlos realized that Juan wasn't there. Instead, he stumbled upon something even more disturbing: a folder filled with photographs of Miguel's wife and daughter. The moment he saw them, Carlos understood exactly what was happening. Miguel's family had become the next targets. Wasting no time, he rushed back to the safe house to warn the others. When he arrived, Carlos found only Lola. Unlike the rest of the team, she had decided to extend her leave for a few more days. She refused to abandon Carlos and was determined to stay by his side until his mission for revenge was finally complete. A short time later, Miguel called Carlos and asked him to meet in person. He claimed to have uncovered critical information that was too sensitive to discuss over the phone. Trusting his old friend, Carlos immediately headed to the agreed meeting spot. The meeting was set at a public bathhouse. Carlos went inside alone while Lola remained in the car to keep watch. As she scanned the area, she suddenly noticed 3 suspicious men quietly sealing off every exit. Her instincts immediately told her something was wrong. Without hesitation, she called Carlos and warned him that they had most likely walked straight into a trap. Unfortunately, by the time Carlos and Lola realized what was happening, it was already too late. The meeting Miguel had arranged was nothing more than a carefully planned trap designed to lure them in. While Carlos desperately searched for a way out of the building, Lola was ambushed by Juan outside, and the two quickly became locked in a brutal hand-to-hand fight. Luckily, Carlos managed to escape through a small bathroom window. The moment he got outside, he sprinted toward Lola, who was still desperately holding her own against Juan's relentless assault. The battle only grew more intense until finally. Although Carlos and Lola managed to escape the trap, they didn't get away unscathed. Lola was shot while shielding Carlos from gunfire, forcing the two of them to retreat and find a safe place before the enemy could finish them off. At the same time, Miguel was on his way to the bathhouse with several soldiers assigned to escort him by the colonel's wife. But something about their behavior suddenly felt off. The way they looked at him and the cold silence between them made Miguel realize that something wasn't right. His instincts proved correct when they suddenly turned on him and tried to eliminate him. Fortunately, Miguel's combat training kicked in, allowing him to take down every attacker before rushing to Carlos's safe house. When he arrived, he found Lola receiving treatment for the gunshot wound she had suffered during the ambush. Filled with guilt, Miguel apologized to Carlos for trusting the colonel's wife and unknowingly leading them straight into the enemy's trap. Despite everything, the ordeal finally revealed the truth. They now knew who had been orchestrating the entire conspiracy from the shadows, the colonel's wife herself. Meanwhile, later that same night, Aurelio was summoned to meet the colonel's wife after submitting his resignation from the military. From the moment he arrived, he sensed that something was wrong, especially when he was instructed to hand over his service pistol under the pretense of following standard security procedures. Although every instinct told him to be cautious, Aurelio complied, unaware of what was really waiting for him.
Bienvenido.
As soon as Aurelio entered the colonel's wife's office, he was confronted with accusations that he had helped Carlos during Hector's abduction from the military base. Without wasting any time, she offered him a way out. She promised to make the entire case disappear on one condition. He had to sign a prepared confession admitting full responsibility for the operation. But Aurelio refused to betray the man he had always respected as his captain. Even though he knew his decision could cost him his life, he would rather face death than sacrifice Carlos to save himself. That choice would soon lead to devastating consequences. The following morning, the colonel's wife contacted Carlos with devastating news. Aurelio had been executed the previous night. She then offered Carlos a way to end everything, surrender himself, and the bloodshed would stop. But Carlos had one condition. He demanded that Juan, the man who had murdered his wife, be brought before him. Once his request was accepted, Carlos agreed to come to the designated meeting point. As planned, Carlos and Miguel headed to the rendezvous together. Meanwhile, the colonel's wife had already positioned dozens of tactical soldiers around the building. From the very beginning, this was never meant to be a negotiation. It was a carefully orchestrated ambush. The moment they arrived, Carlos and Miguel were greeted by the heartbreaking sight of Aurelio's lifeless body lying on the floor. The gruesome scene only fueled their determination. Without hesitation, they stepped into the elevator and rode it to the upper floor where the colonel's wife was waiting. As soon as the elevator doors opened, waves of heavily armed soldiers stormed in from every direction. Carlos and Miguel fought relentlessly, cutting through one wave after another. In the middle of the chaos, the elevator doors suddenly closed again, separating the two. Carlos was left to face the enemy alone. Despite putting up a fierce fight, the overwhelming numbers eventually caught up with him. Carlos was finally overpowered, restrained, and dragged before the colonel's wife, who was waiting alongside Juan. With Juan watching, the colonel's wife deliberately tortured Carlos, determined to break both his body and his spirit. Just as she was about to finish him off, the situation took a dramatic turn. Miguel burst into the building from outside, unleashing a barrage of gunfire that tore through the enemy's ranks. The surprise attack gave Carlos the opening he needed to break free. The final battle had begun. Carlos faced the colonel's wife, while Miguel engaged Juan in a savage axe fight that pushed both men to their limits. The colonel's wife attacked Carlos relentlessly, refusing to give him a moment to recover. But after a brutal showdown, Carlos finally managed to defeat her. Elsewhere, Miguel continued his desperate battle against Juan, one of the military's most ruthless soldiers. At one point, Juan nearly killed him by choking him unconscious. The fight eventually spilled onto the edge of the building, where Carlos and Juan tumbled over the side and were left hanging high above the ground. Regaining his footing, Miguel quickly clipped a safety line onto Carlos's tactical vest in a desperate attempt to pull him back up. But now he was supporting the weight of 2 men at once. Realizing that Miguel couldn't hold on much longer, Carlos made the hardest decision of his life. To save his best friend, he unclipped his vest and let himself fall. Some time later, peace was finally restored. Miguel was promoted to colonel, taking over the position once held by the colonel's wife. Lola made a full recovery from her injuries, and life slowly began to move forward. In the film's closing moments, Miguel and Lola remembered that most of Carlos's lottery fortune was still untouched. Together, they decided to use the remaining money to build a new future, and to carry on the dream Carlos had sacrificed everything to protect. The deeper meaning and life lessons behind this film. At first glance, this movie may seem like nothing more than the story of a former soldier who wins a fortune and uses it to hunt down the people responsible for destroying his life. But beneath all the action, gunfights, betrayals, and revenge, the story carries several deeper messages worth thinking about. One loss can completely change a person. Carlos begins as a disciplined soldier who takes his duties seriously. But after losing his wife and barely surviving the attack himself, everything changes. His life becomes centered around one goal: finding the people responsible and making them pay. But the story also reminds us that pain doesn't always have to become a reason to destroy ourselves. When someone spends too long living with anger, revenge can slowly replace everything else that once mattered. Carlos finds many of the answers he was looking for, but along the way, he also loses people who genuinely cared about him. Too money can't solve everything. After winning the lottery, Carlos suddenly has access to resources he never had before. He can buy vehicles, weapons, equipment, a headquarters, and anything else he needs for his mission. But no amount of money can bring his wife back. The fortune that could have given him a fresh start instead becomes the fuel for a journey that ultimately ends in tragedy. And that's one of the strongest messages in the film. Wealth can give us more choices, but it doesn't necessarily give us peace. In the end, what determines where our lives go isn't how much money we have, but what we choose to do with it. Loyalty is revealed when everything falls apart. Miguel faces an incredibly difficult choice throughout the story. On one side, he has his career and his family to protect. On the other, Carlos is not only his former commander, but also his closest friend. Despite knowing the enormous risks, Miguel still chooses to stand beside him. Lola and Aurelio show the same kind of loyalty. They don't stay with Carlos simply because they expect a reward. They stay because they believe he is someone worth fighting for. This gives us an important lesson. A truly loyal person isn't someone who always agrees with you. It's someone who doesn't abandon you when things get difficult. 4. Power doesn't automatically make someone good. Perhaps the most disturbing part of the story is that Carlos's greatest enemies aren't criminals alone. Some of them are people who are supposed to protect the law. They use their positions for personal gain, manipulate others, and sacrifice innocent people simply to protect their own power. The film reminds us that a uniform, a title, or a position of authority doesn't automatically make someone honorable. What truly matters is how a person chooses to use the power they have. Someone can appear respectable in public while hiding an entirely different side behind closed doors. That's why we shouldn't judge people solely by their position, appearance, or reputation. 5. Revenge doesn't always give you the ending you want. This may be the most important lesson of Carlos's entire journey. He gets closer and closer to the people responsible for destroying his life. He uncovers the truth, confronts his enemies, and gets the revenge he was searching for. But in the end, he pays the ultimate price. His story shows us that revenge may bring temporary satisfaction, but it doesn't necessarily heal the wound that caused it in the first place. Sometimes, the greatest victory isn't destroying the person who hurt you. It's surviving, moving forward, and building a better life without allowing them to control your future. Carlos allowed his past to determine almost everything that happened afterward, and eventually that past cost him his life. So when life gives us a wound, it's natural to feel angry, disappointed, or betrayed, but we shouldn't allow that pain to decide what the rest of our lives will look like. Someone who hurt you may have taken a piece of your past. Don't let them take the rest of your future too. And that's what makes this film more than just an action-packed revenge story. Behind all the violence and chaos, it tells us that loss, betrayal, money, power, friendship, and loyalty ultimately come down to one thing: the choices we make when life puts us under pressure.